am I live? Good to see you guys. Apologies for the delay. I think I'm about 15 minutes late. I guess technically 30 minutes because I did postpone it. But yeah, I'm dealing with very difficult situations here with the power going out, sometimes for 4 hours at a time. And so I don't know if you guys know, another YouTuber has got to deal with multiple power outages in the day, some of them that aren't reliable. Last night, I don't know if you remember, I cut the live short because there was a outage scheduled for just after I cut the live short, and then it actually stayed on. The power stayed on. Very frustrating, very difficult circumstances to work under, but I do try to do my best. So what we're going to talk about in this analysis is this vehicle. What are the implications of the vehicle? What if the vehicle is the killer's vehicle? And what inferences can we draw from that? And some of the areas that takes us into is really quite fascinating. It really is quite fascinating. This idea that if we have come so close that we know the vehicle of the killer, and maybe we don't, maybe it's irrelevant, maybe it's not that close, but it is possible. Something that I have thought is certainly sort of swirling is, can you imagine if you law enforcement, and there has been quite a lot of pressure to deliver something, to deliver some progress, to offer some clue, to offer some sense of, that the case is moving forward. But you can't, you are legally bound, so you can't actually name a suspect. Well, is it possible to name a suspect without naming a suspect? Well, isn't that what this is? Naming the vehicle, pointing the finger toward the vehicle, is in a way perhaps pointing to a suspect without pointing to a suspect. Have you guys thought of that? Have you thought of that as being possible, even probable? So thanks a lot for your patience in waiting for me to come on. I know it's not ideal, but thanks very much for that. Cece says, hi from a very frosty London. Leah Simpson, Terry Dean, good to see. Pauline Buckles, the humble grower, says, this case is getting complicated. I actually think the vehicle potentially offers a avenue that can seriously simplify this case, right? I do think that the vehicle can really narrow down the pool, potentially. It's possible that it might not, but it's certainly possible that it might. Now, again, we don't know what law enforcement know, but law enforcement have been very careful, very cagey, very sensitive about implicating anyone. And if you think about it, this is one of the biggest moments over the past 3 weeks where, they've been saying all along, we don't regard this person as a suspect. We don't see that as relevant. For example, what happened to the dog that was skinned. In other words, they've been debunking things, denying things. They've been sort of backtracking. They've been sort of warding off things. This is one of the first things that they've kind of stepped forward and said, we're interested in this. We find this noteworthy and interesting. That makes you think there's something serious behind that. If they've been so careful not to implicate certain people, this vehicle possibly suggests that they feel quite strongly about this vehicle. Unfortunately, we don't know a lot of the details around this vehicle. We don't know if it arrived, stayed, and then left. We don't know whether it sort of came from somewhere, stopped for a certain period of time, and drove off. We don't know whether the vehicle was typically parked there. Let me show you something that has just come onto my radar, which I thought was quite interesting. Can I bring this up? This was sent to me by SM Kobelinsky. Can you guys see this? So it's possible that, can you guys see that? There we go. So someone is saying that a 2012 Hyundai Elantra was listed 10 days ago in Boise, Idaho, right? Could this be the same vehicle? I think it's a bit of a long shot. I think it's a bit of a long shot what's going on here. But the fact is, in the Caitlin Armstrong case, she sold her vehicle within a day or two of a crime being committed there, right? So there could be some intertextuality there. I thought I would just share that with you. I've also been sent this image, just shows you once again sort of the sort of fairy tale of that these girls were living. Don't they look happy? Don't they look beautiful? Doesn't it look like a perfect college existence, right? Doesn't it look and feel that way? Let me do that. And so it's one thing if you were part of that and you were part of the party, but what did it feel like if you weren't part of that? Okay, let's have a look at some of the latest comments here. SM Koblinski says, sad in retrospect. Yeah, the sorority life. So I want to talk a little bit about the vehicle. One of the things that I think is really pertinent is why has no one come forward? So if the vehicle is in a way something harmless, yeah, I was in the area, I was actually hungry, I kind of wanted a midnight snack or whatever it is. Why is someone apparently not come forward? Obviously, it's possible somebody did come forward, but doesn't it feel like someone didn't come forward? Because if someone did come forward and it was sort of a harmless thing, then surely the police would say, we sorted it out, it's a dead end or whatever, because they've been quite transparent, they've been quite quick, and quite effective in their communications. It's also possible that someone came forward and they are still um, asking questions, figuring things out, collating information. They may feel that it's not relevant, but they haven't quite reached the point where they feel confident enough to say one way or the other. But doesn't it feel like whoever is the driver hasn't come forward? Doesn't it feel like that? And I think you might say this is speculation, but think about it just from a rational perspective. If someone comes forward, then you would say, well, then it's an innocent scenario. It's someone who was visiting a friend. It was someone who wanted a midnight snack. It was someone who stopped off there on the way home, whatever it is, right? I'm saying someone came forward. If someone hasn't come forward after 24 hours or whatever it is now, several hours, I mean, this is in the news. The killer's got to be watching the news. Some people who may be even suspect the killer, some people who may think, I think I know who it is. I think I know who drives that car. I don't know. They may also feel suspicious, more suspicious than we do. But the point is, if no one has come forward now, and of course we don't know for a fact that no one has come forward, but if no one has come forward, doesn't that suggest it is the killer's car? That wouldn't you say it strongly suggests that? Because it would only be in the killer's interest not to do that, unless someone else was committing some kind of crime at the same time, which seems a little unlikely. It's possible, but unlikely. Dave says the person might have other reasons for not coming forward. It's possible, but I think you're kind of pushing it there. You know, I really don't think that that's. I think if your car was in the news, and you could help with the investigation in this situation, I think you would. Songbird says, I think the person responsible has not come forward. That is I think, a sensible assessment. And so if that's the case, then I think you can start thinking that possibly the killer drives this vehicle. You can start going down that road until further information comes out that definitively contradicts that, debunks that, discounts that, right? And I do think it's quite interesting when you take that route and you say, if the killer did drive this car, what does it say about him? And I think it says quite a lot. Tell me if you guys agree with this inference. Do you think the person who was driving that vehicle, this is in a student community, do you think the person that was driving that vehicle was a student? Now let's first ask that question. Do you think the person who was driving this white vehicle was a student? Chelsea Taylor, good to see you. Bria, welcome. It's quite late for you, 11:45. So some say yes, some say maybe. Sharon says no, right? This video ran nail 3:05 a.m. at the longest. Not quite sure what that means. So it seems like kind of a mixed bag. Some of you say, I don't think it's a student. Some of you say you do think it's a student. Bear in mind, we're talking about a vehicle that is somewhere in the early hours of a Saturday morning, right? In like a party zone, right? That's kind of what you're talking about. So I'm going to tell you what I think. I think that it is a student's vehicle, but I don't think the student was able to buy that vehicle. I don't think the student said, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, I want that vehicle, right? I think that student's parent bought that vehicle for them, which is totally different. Thanks a lot, Kelly Gal 3. Thanks so much for that. Let me say that again. Number one, I think the person driving the vehicle is a student because of the community that is mostly students. Also because of where the vehicle was spotted, when it was spotted, where it was spotted. And if you take that further and you say, okay, so it was a student driving, it may not be. But if you take that further and you say, do you think that student had the agency to buy that vehicle? Is that the kind of vehicle that the student wanted for himself, right? Could be herself. Do you think that was the kind of vehicle that student wanted? The color, do you think it was the color that person wanted? Do you think it was the kind of vehicle they wanted? If they could have chosen kind of any vehicle, do you think they got the vehicle they wanted? And I think the answer is no. That's the kind of vehicle a parent gives their child. And basically they decide this is a reliable vehicle that will serve you well. This is the kind of vehicle that will get you where you need to go. And you don't need to look cool, and you don't need to drive a snazzy red Ferrari. This is adequate. Do you guys agree with that? So I'm glad there's at least one person here who says, I was thinking it's the sort of sensible car a parent would buy for their kids. And so what that's already telling you is that this kid has sensible parents who are, in a way, I don't want to say babysitting, but basically maybe coddling to some extent their child. Think about this vehicle and compare it to the spirit that you're seeing here. And think about it compared to this vehicle. Compare this vehicle to that vehicle and think about agency. Just think about this idea. Someone can only afford that vehicle, or can only, can't even afford it because their parents gave it to them, maybe, right? And then here you have, at the end of the year, Kaylee apparently buying her own vehicle with her own money, almost new. And like, I don't know about you, but I would say that um, that vehicle that she bought, the Range Rover Evoque, I think, that's like a, I don't know, 8 out of 10 vehicle. This, and it's quite new. And this vehicle, I would say, is kind of like a 6 out of 10 vehicle. In other words, the one is super cool. The other one is sort of so. You're not really going to phone your best friend and say, "Do you know what car my boyfriend's driving?" Right? You get that sense. So, in other words, can you see that there's a totally different sense of agency? Um, Kaylee can buy this super cool vehicle, right? And this guy maybe can't actually even buy it because it was given to him by his parent, and that's his power struggle. That's sort of where within that's the dynamic within which he finds himself. He's Mr. Invisible, he's Mr. Ordinary, and he's trying to stand out, but he doesn't have his own agency. Don't you kind of get that sense? Jennifer says the Range Rover is a cool car. Hungry Helmet says, I don't think that this matters. So you must bear in mind, this isn't about what a 25-year-old, a 30-year-old, a 40-year-old, a 50-year-old, a 60-year-old, what your attitude is to a vehicle. It's what is your attitude as a very young person who's starting out in the world, to life, to the adventure, to having the power to make certain choices, or not having that power, or seeing someone given that power, or seeing someone achieve that power, or kind of reach that level of agency while you don't. Now, you might say that really doesn't bother me at all. But the question isn't whether it bothers you. The question is whether it bothers these kids. And I think if you can open up your imagination, you can fire up the rockets of your and the engines of your imagination, and think, what were you like when you got your first vehicle? Were you able to buy your first vehicle? I got my mother's vehicle, and it was kind of not such a great vehicle compared to other vehicles that were out there, right? The car I had at university wasn't terribly awesome. And that, in a way, asserts your status already. Basically says, okay, so that's your setup. Well, these are the cool kids who can afford this. You can't afford it. So you out of that game. Do you see what I'm saying? You might think as a 30-year-old, 40-year-old, 50-year-old that your um, status has been ascertained, that who you are is certain, and you don't really worry about it very much, or you don't really care about it very much. But of course, at 20, it hasn't been ascertained, and it very much is hanging in the balance, right? Do you get what I'm saying? So it is actually a very big issue. The first job you get coming out of college, the girlfriend you have or boyfriend, or whichever, the partner that you have, the level of agency you've achieved at that young age or haven't achieved, right? Thanks a lot, Sharon. And thanks a lot, Marla K. So I'm not quite sure why this is just activated. Sorry about that. Thanks a lot, Marla K. So I think one way to get to the right level of where you say, I can understand why this is a big deal, is don't think about this from your perspective as an adult with kids or whatever. Think of it when you were 20 years old, right? When you were still developing power in your life and status and where you fitted in vis-a-vis your fellow man and woman, your fellow students, right? And there is a power struggle. Some people come out on top in that power struggle. Some people just stay kind of in the middle. Um, I feel like I'm 50 years old, and I feel like my power struggle is still kind of evolving. In a way, I've dodged some of it, and in some ways, it still isn't crystal clear, right? And so it's different for a lot of people. But for some people, like I would say Kaylee and Maddie and Zaina and Ethan, they had this fairy tale college life, and their agency was absolutely clear. I found someone I love, I've got the life I want, there you go. But for someone else, perhaps the person driving this car, they were sort of just going along in a car that their parent bought them, and maybe they following a role that they can't really escape from, that they don't really have the life that they want. They can't really get the life that they want. Brian says, do you have any more photos of them? You mean besides that? No, I don't think I really got too much more besides that, not right now. So I do want to talk a little bit more about the vehicle. I've got this image from, I think, the body cam, quite a sort of vague image. Can you guys see that? Have you guys seen this image before? Okay. And it's only when you kind of drill down into the narrative that you start asking these sort of careful questions. What is actually in this press release? Right? So I suppose the most obvious inference, and I mentioned this earlier, if the Elantra is the killers, if we just assume that, is that the killer isn't from that side of town, right? So earlier we've said we think the car belongs to a student. We could be wrong on all of these answers, all of these questions, all of these answers. But some of us have said we think the car belongs to a student. We think the car was given to the student by his parent. We think that the driver is a he. We think that it's quite serious because the person hasn't come forward. And now there's another inference, and it is the killer from that side of town? If this car was spotted there, is the killer from that side of town? What do you think the answer is? It is dumb. It is dumb, but you've had killers commit crimes in front of CCTV cameras, like Chris Watts and Patrick Frazee. And the Delphi killer apparently parking right under a CCTV camera. So no one is saying criminals are the smartest people out there. And I don't know if I don't think he bought the car to commit quadruple murder. He had the car, but what I think is quite interesting is you had to ask the question at some point, did the killer arrive on foot, or did the killer drive there, or did the killer live there and drive away? Those three questions. And I think some of us have assumed he may have arrived on foot, he may not have lived that far away. And I do think the idea of a vehicle brings up this idea that he may actually have driven there, something happened, then he drove away, which suggests that he doesn't actually live there, which means he doesn't live in that general area. And that you could even say is a wrong assessment. You could say, even if he lived 2 miles away, maybe he drove there because he didn't want to walk back with his clothing full of blood, like the Delphi killer, right? So you start making these inferences, and then you feel like, wow, that didn't really get me anywhere. right? Raw Olympia says, was Maddie's black borrowed jacket found at the park? I don't know. That has been coming up. Where did she get that jacket from? What role did that jacket play? So there is this feeling that maybe he had to drive there to get there. And if that's the case, well, then he wasn't a neighbor. He wasn't local to the neighborhood. He wasn't walking distance from either the house or where the party was to his own home. But then you kind of got to ask yourself, is that right? Maybe he was a neighbor and his car was there anyway. If he was a neighbor, that would be a good reason for the car to be there. Not a good reason for the car to depart at that time. But then you ask the question, well, does the car depart? And that's where we come back to this police report. Let me ask you that question. Does the vehicle depart? Does the vehicle in this narrative arrive, is in transit near the house for a while, and then does it depart? Is that what we're talking about? The Humble Grower says it was a drive-by. So look at what we're talking about here. We're asking the question, did the car come from somewhere else, stop for a certain length of time, and then drive off? Well, what does this little narrative tell us? Do you think it does tell us? Well, let's read it. Detectives are interested in speaking with the occupant of a white 2011 to 2013 Hyundai Elantra with an unknown license plate. Tips and leads have led investigators to look for additional information about a vehicle, and this is the this is the key bit of information. A vehicle being in the immediate area during the early hours of November 13th. So what does that mean to say the vehicle has been in the immediate area? What does that kind of mean? What does it mean to say the vehicle is being in the immediate area? Well, what it actually says is the vehicle, it isn't clarified whether the vehicle moves at all. It isn't clarified that the vehicle leaves or when it leaves or that it leaves. It isn't clarified that the vehicle arrives. It's simply clarified that at a certain time the vehicle is there. And so one does wonder, do the authorities know that this vehicle enters the fabric at a certain time, pauses in the fabric for a certain length of time, then exits the fabric, and maybe they can follow that vehicle through the rest of the fabric? Now, if you think about the Delphi case, we thought initially all that they knew was that there was video footage which was frozen into that sort of screen grab, and audio, and we thought that was it. And it turned out that there was also the CCTV. So are there a couple of other cards that law enforcement have that they're not playing? In other words, there's other CCTV showing this vehicle moving suspiciously at suspicious times. And all they're saying is, well, we know that vehicle was perhaps where it shouldn't have been. And does anyone know who drives this vehicle? Now, I think another inference you could draw is if you say the killer doesn't come forward or the driver of the vehicle doesn't come forward, but neither does anyone else at the university, doesn't that mean that that drive is not local? Doesn't that mean that someone came from out of town, potentially? I'm talking about deep diver, thanks a lot for that. Doesn't it mean that someone came from outside of town, perhaps even driving their parents' vehicle to attend this football game, and maybe they weren't even a student from there. Maybe it was a student from another university, right? Maybe it was even a rental, right? And in that situation, you wouldn't expect any of the students at the University of Idaho to know anything about that vehicle. This idea that it's a student driving it, but it's not the kind of vehicle a student would really choose to drive or choose to have as his own vehicle. Well, maybe it's because it's a rental. So it could also be a rental, right? If it's a rental, it kind of makes you think, didn't someone come from far away? Couldn't it be someone from another university? A lot of that, I must say, feels alien. It feels like the killer knew quite a lot about Moscow. Doesn't it feel like that? That the killer was from around there. And so this vehicle starts to tear away at that idea. Did he come from somewhere else, as in the other side of town? Did he come from a totally different town? And now it starts to make it, that does start to make it a bit more complicated. But what makes it easier is as soon as you can attach the vehicle to the perpetrator. Think about this in the Delphi case. If you could say, well, the perpetrator is the driver of this vehicle. Well, we just need to then find this vehicle and we find the perpetrator. Same thing with the murder of Mo Wilson. If the perpetrator is the driver of this vehicle that's passing through this alley at a certain time, all we've got to do is find the driver of this vehicle. And in that sense, it actually narrows down the list of suspects to possibly a handful of people, possibly even one or two, possibly even one. And I've got to say, when the information came out that it could be, sorry, when the information came out about this vehicle, I thought we may actually have an arrest within the next 24 to 48 hours. And I still think that that's possible. I still think in the next couple of hours, we could actually have an arrest. If we don't, then it feels like we've got a Mo Wilson type situation going on, potentially. Kaki says, got to have more on this car than just police cam footage. I think it's important. Marla K says, what's interesting to me is Ali releasing this, and we know they have resources available. I don't see it as that. Some people have said it's kind of a misdirection or distraction. I don't see it like that at all. So let me ask this question. If the car doesn't depart, does it mean it wasn't involved in the crime? What do you guys think about that? If this white vehicle is spotted near the crime scene, but it doesn't actually depart, does it mean it was involved in the crime? Stephanie says, I think it's very important. Let me ask that a different way. If the car does depart, if the car is near 1122 King Road at, say, 3 o'clock in the morning, somewhere around there, 3:30, and then it departs, does that mean it's involved in the crime? What do you guys think? Jessica says, I think an arrest is imminent. Stephanie says, I think the car is relevant either way. Okay, so I think you've got to come back to what came out fairly early on. I can't quite remember. Let me see if I can bring it up. Idaho. So less than a week, so 1/3 of the current time that has passed after less than 1 week had passed, do you remember that the investigators were seen measuring tire marks outside the house, right? So didn't that already indicate that the investigators were thinking about a driver? They were just thinking about that scenario, right? And if they're measuring tire marks, aren't they actually thinking about the idea of someone arriving in a way, possibly arriving and stopping at speed, or leaving hastily and leaving these tire marks, or both? In other words, that the whole tire mark argument is kind of saying, did someone arrive in a hurry and leave in a hurry, or just leave in a hurry, right? I suppose you could argue that you would have tire marks anyway because the roads are slippery. I don't buy that. I don't really think you would have tire marks on slippery road. I think you'd have tire marks where it's not slippery and someone is getting away at speed, right? So that's where you kind of ask this question, what is the significance of those skid marks? And that's where I think the question comes up, is there a relationship between the skid marks and this vehicle? Did this vehicle make the skid marks? And I think you can start to join dots when, for example, you measure those tire marks and you measure the tires of this kind of vehicle. Did this kind of vehicle make those tire marks? It's kind of a fingerprint, more like a footprint, the tire marks. Does that make sense? So let me bring that up. So this is them measuring those tire marks. This was on the, let's just bring that up. This is on, I think it is on the 6th, sorry, November 19th, 6 days after the incident, right? November 19th. So 6 days later, and if you look at this image, there they are measuring the tire marks, and look at the vehicles that are parked there. There's a silver vehicle. I don't know how many, probably a lot of these vehicles are law enforcement vehicles anyway. So that's one angle. Here's another angle. But can you see the tire marks over here? Let me do this. Can you see that looks like tire marks over there? Does it look like could be snow or something in the middle of this road? It's possible, but does it look like it? So here's another image of them measuring those tire marks. Look at those tire marks. Do those look like the tire marks of a SUV? Let me blow it up. Just at face value, do those look like the tire marks? There you've got a bit of a reference to the investigator's shoe. There's the other tire mark. Do those look like the tire marks of like a heavy duty vehicle, like a F-150, a big truck or SUV, or does it look like the tire marks of a sedan? What do you guys think? Just at face value, do those look like the tire tracks of a big vehicle or a sort of a regular sized vehicle? Miss Jane says small car. Zircon says small car. I don't think it's small. I just think it's not a big vehicle. It's not a SUV. It's basically just a sedan. That's also a good point. It's not ball tires. They're actually leaving treads. You can actually see treads are left behind. It's quite a good point. Yeah, so it's a sedan. It's not. It's probably not a truck. It's probably not a SUV, right? So doesn't this start to possibly link hands between someone leaving here in a hurry And the tracks left behind that superficially seem to Sudan, sorry, it should be sedan, right? Small sedan. That superficially corresponds to the vehicle that they're looking for. Yeah, not wide enough to be a truck. Kay says, why no license plates? I don't think it's a case that there are no license plates. I think they just don't know what the license plates are. Let me just see if I can bring that up again. Is it unknown license plates? It's not that there weren't license plates, just that they were unknown. Marsha says, do you think there's a connection between the guy arrested yesterday and this? I don't know. It's certainly not in the news. I would say, I would just say I don't know. Okay, so let's continue. So this is another view of them measuring those tire tracks. Now, what I find quite interesting is they're measuring these tire tracks after 6 days, right? Where we are in terms of what we're seeing here, measuring those tire tracks, and it's not just tire tracks in one area, right? If you look at, where is it? Sorry, let me go back to those tire tracks. So if you look at these tire tracks, that's right next to the side of the road, right? That's right sort of by the side of the road there. If you look at these tire tracks, they are somewhere else. These tire tracks are kind of in the center of the road. Can you see that? Although there is that sort of kink in it. And then you've got these tire tracks, which seem to be somewhere else as well. It might just be another angle, but it's definitely at least two sets of tire tracks. And these tire tracks seem to be turning. Was this because another vehicle was approaching or someone was leaving in a hurry? What is actually going on here? Right? So I just want to clarify that this vehicle isn't a Hyundai Elantra. This vehicle that's parked here, that's a Chevy. That's not the vehicle that they're looking for. That's not the, let me clarify. So that logo that you see there is this logo, right? That's a Chevy logo. That's what it looks like, right? That's the logo that you're seeing. Where is it now? Is it there? That's the logo you're seeing. It's kind of like a gold star. Whereas the Hyundai logo looks like this. Totally different. It kind of looks like that. Totally different. So don't get confused when you see a white vehicle. It's not the one that they're looking for. So in this article from CNN, it says new details emerge about vehicle at the scene, and this is on December 8th. And so my question is, did this information actually come to light as early as, in terms of with the law enforcement, did it come onto their radar as early as something like the 19th, right? So within the first 6 days. And so they were aware of a vehicle that was there. Then they went to measure tire tracks that were there, but then they couldn't make any further progress. Then they continued investigating, and then 2 additional weeks passed, and only now are they handing over that card to us and saying, do you guys recognize this vehicle? In other words, haven't they taken that line of investigation just about as far as they can? Who do you know owns a white vehicle like this? It's very hard to imagine that if there is something to this vehicle, that nobody knows that. I mean, think about well, I guess the other side of it is, when you were at university, could you say for a fact who drove certain vehicles? Like, I knew a handful of people. I can think now, I remember a certain person driving that vehicle, knew which vehicle I drove, but there'd be a whole bunch of vehicles you couldn't say who drove them. But surely that vehicle lives somewhere. Does that vehicle live alone wherever it lives? One does wonder. Okay, let me have a look at that link. Let's just see if I can bring it up. Stephanie says investigators have determined that all the details associated with body cam of the unrelated incident, including cars captured on it, are not related to the murders. Okay. I just want to open that. So I'm not quite sure what that means. So this came out an hour ago. Let's put that up. So Moscow police debunk rumors around white car seen in body cam video. Investigators have determined that all the details associated with the body cam of the unrelated incident, including cars captured on, are not related. Okay. Just see what they say. Okay, so this is what it says. Videos circulated on social media showed a Moscow police officer speaking to individuals less than a mile away from the off-campus home. The interaction, which police said stemmed from an alcohol offense, took place just before 3 a.m., putting it right up against the 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. window. So I don't know if you guys are talking about that arrest. You asked me, do I think it's related? I said, I don't know. Well, I think this is the answer. It's not related. Law enforcement don't believe it's related. I don't know whether this officer addresses that question. Let's have a look.
Something to those families, and it's important to me. It's to box up personal belongings of the people that live there, and we're going to be getting those items back to the.
Okay, so it's not quite what we want to hear about. Moscow police have now shut down speculation around the video. So I think this is really something else. It's dealing with body cam video. It nevertheless still means this white vehicle is relevant. That's how I understand it. On Wednesday, investigators announced that's over here. On Wednesday, investigators announced they're seeking details about the owner of a white Hyundai Elantra seen near the crime scene. And then it says, but Moscow police have now shut down speculation around the video. I don't think that is shutting down the thing that they want to know, is that who is the owner of this vehicle. That's how I understand it. They're trying to shut down speculation around some other footage. That's what I think it's about. I think they're saying it's not the white vehicle in the body cam footage, it's another white vehicle. It is not the vehicle investigators are seeking information about, right? It's another vehicle. And then here it says, the update by police on Wednesday is perhaps the most substantial in more than 3 weeks. I agree with that. Police, it says here, detectives did not reveal whether the owner is believed to be a suspect, but said that the occupants may have critical information. Well, it could be that they're a suspect, and it could be that they're not. Yeah, so it is actually quite confusing. Pleasure. Thanks for that, Stephanie. So, although, and this headline is quite confusing, the headline is Moscow police debunk rumors around white car. Well, it's not the white car, it's a white car, right? Do you guys see that? And it's the details associated with body cam of an unrelated incident. That's what's at issue here. Anyway, if you guys are interested in reading this article, it is worth looking at. Check it out. Just instinctively, I would have thought if they had changed their minds, first of all, that would be in the media. Well, police backtrack again. Also, you would imagine there would be a retraction on the police website. Sorry, guys, my bad. You know, there's nothing. We actually don't want to know anything about the white sedan. Well, actually, they do. So that is not the case here. This is to do with body cam. And I must say, I was looking for the body cam footage and found little snippets of it, but it doesn't, as we see, it doesn't actually seem relevant. It also says Moscow police have repeatedly urged people not to engage with unbridled speculation online and to only trust updates and information released by authorities. That's kind of the position I want to take, that this true crime channel wants to take, is that we don't do unbridled suspicion here. And you know, if you are sitting there thinking, but hang on, you know different to any other true crime channel, then you don't know this channel very well. If you're thinking, but hang on, you're speculating just like any other channel, actually we're not. We don't throw names around, we don't rumor monger, and we don't witch hunt on this channel. We try and behave responsibly, with integrity, and in a trustworthy way, based on we look for reliable sources. We don't just repeat things that are said for views or for sensation. We try and verify it. Does that make sense? Do you guys kind of agree? Yeah, so Terry says there's no update on the Moscow PD Facebook, which basically confirms that we are still looking for the owner of this vehicle. I also must say I agree with this. Let me just bring this up. We firmly believe speculation and unvetted information is a disservice. It is. It is. Right? And so we've got to be very careful on this channel that we're not part of the greater disservice, where it's just rumors and speculation and let's have fun with it. We are actually trying to, as a separate entity, as an independent entity, investigate this and try and figure out what's going on, right? Okay, we like to think that we may be smarter than the average channel. Are we? It's for you to decide. But we try to be. We try to be smart. We try to be factual. Okay. So here is another image of just a lot of vehicles. One of the best images I could find where you just see a heck of a lot of images, sorry, a lot of vehicles, and none of them are a white sort of sedan. Okay, there are a lot of police cruisers over here, but even over there, you don't see a white sedan anywhere. And you do sort of wonder, if you were a resident here, wouldn't you have known that there's a white sedan, a Hyundai Elantra, a kind of vehicle like that that lives next door to me? Wouldn't you know that? Wouldn't you notice that? And so if they're not saying that, isn't that because it comes from somewhere else? Thanks a lot, Magical Mother. Okay. So there are three of the vehicles, and as far as I know, these three vehicles, three of those vehicles, one is obviously law enforcement, but three of those vehicles I think actually belong to the victims. These three, I think, belong to the victims. That is not a law enforcement vehicle. That belonged to, I'm not actually sure. Wasn't this Maddie's vehicle? Do you guys agree that that was Madison's vehicle? Let me put this question in chat. Was the Chevy Madison's? We know this vehicle was Kaylee's. Chelsea says, whether or not you live on campus as a student, you must have a parking pass of some sort, which would be easy for campus PD to spot you out. Yeah, yeah, Master, that's a really good point. Is that you would imagine campus PD. I mean, this is true of campuses around the world. You would imagine campus PD have a vehicle register of the licenses that they've given out, for parking. And then that does raise the question, was this vehicle driven that day by someone's, was it a rental? Did it belong to someone's parent? Or is it from someone coming from out of town? What's the story? It's quite frustrating that we don't know the answer, but it could be that that answer is being delivered to the police and it's about to, it just needs to filter through to us. It's still being processed. It's possible. Casablanca says, I think the red Jeep was Ethan's. It does make sense. Someone says, I heard the red Jeep was Maddie's. Okay. So there's just some uncertainty there. Someone says, white Chevy equals Maddie. That is what I understood. That's quite interesting. Stephanie says, parents' weekend was the weekend prior. Anyway, we at a sort of level where we ought to have more certainty on really basic things. Whose vehicle was that blue vehicle? We know whose vehicle that was. But what is quite interesting is just in terms of these three vehicles, which is the odd one out? Which one stands out? Which one stands out in a big way? Well, that one. Why does it stand out so much? Fractured Fairy Tale says, has there been a case like this before? What about the O.J. Simpson case? I don't know if that's a good analogy. Also, what about the Isla Vista case? But not exactly like this. Okay. So let me continue. So this is one of the most recent headlines I've seen from Fox News. Idaho police likely using investigative genetic genealogy, and that is obviously studying DNA. So that's also something that could take a while to deliver a result. I've got to say, I don't really have much confidence in this because it is all about getting a result out of CODIS, right? And in other words, all of that is conditional on the killer being someone who committed some other crime. And I don't think that's the case here. If he has committed another crime, then that should make things really easy. But I think the killer is a student. So they say here it's pretty quick to compare against CODIS. Had they gotten a match, I think they probably would have arrested by now. Well, I thought exactly the same thing. If it was so simple, you just put this profile through CODIS, well, case solved. This is our suspect. Here's his picture. This is his name. Go get him. Well, that hasn't happened because the person probably hasn't committed a crime like this before against people. I wouldn't be surprised if he's committed a crime like this against animals. Yeah, I don't know why you say that, because the issue is that you are trying to get a profile which you then run through CODIS. So I'm not quite sure why you say that. You use genetic genealogy to develop a profile, then you take that profile that you've developed and you run that through CODIS. CODIS is that combined DNA index system. That is where it has previous samples from criminals, right? Okay. So I'm going to run through a couple of additional analysis that I've done, and let's see where that gets us. So about 3 days ago, I was saying that I believe that the cops do have unofficial suspects. And I thought this is a really good headline from CNN, this one. And I think the issue with the vehicle confirms that same thing, that the cops actually do have, in their mind, unofficial suspects. I wouldn't be surprised if the police believe the driver of this vehicle is a suspect in their minds. And obviously it's an unofficial suspect. They haven't said this person's suspicious. They're saying, what did they actually say? We want this person to come forward. Let's see if I can just find what they say. Is it, where are you? It's not that one. It's over here somewhere. So they say investigators believe the occupant may have critical information. What could that critical information be if it's not suspicious? So when you arrived there at 3 in the morning, did you see something suspicious? Well, what were you doing there at 3 in the morning? What were you doing in your vehicle at 3 in the morning? Whatever the time was. I think the other way of putting this is investigators believe the occupant of this vehicle may have critical information about what happened inside the house. That would be another way of putting it. But would that allow the person to come forward? Can you see how this statement is also to some extent gaslighting and manipulative? It's sort of saying, don't worry, we don't suspect you. Please come forward. We just need your help. When don't you think it's actually quite a lot more serious than that? In other words, it's a bit of a euphemism. It's a little bit of understating what they really think. It's a bit of a play on words. Don't you guys see that? Cotton Star, good to see you here. Brittany Carter says, what happened was internet sleuths requested the body cam footage from the police officers that were called at 3 a.m. Across the street in the body footage, you can see a light being turned off. Okay. I just want to see. Yeah, Cotton Star says, what happens when there's no DNA bingo? Well, doesn't it mean that it's not a regular criminal? Isn't that what it means? Doesn't it mean it's a new criminal? It's a first-time offender, essentially. Well, there's 666 people watching. Please, someone stop watching, or one more person watch. Okay, there we go. Thanks a lot. Okay. Pauline says, remember in the Summer Wells case, there was a red vehicle seen in the area and they have never come forward. That's very intertextual and very worrying. That can be the result. Someone never comes forward. That's the important clue, and the case is never resolved. Thanks, Cash. Thanks a lot for that. Chelsea says, my mind doesn't get how people think it's more possible someone brazenly ran into this home instead of it being intended, knife point going wrong. My mind doesn't get how people think it's more possible someone brazenly ran into this home. I don't think someone brazenly ran into, I don't think it was like brazen and random. I think it was, there was some connection. There's some connection going on. I think that that's probably accurate. I think it's 3:30 to 4 a.m. I don't know if I'd go as late as 4:30 a.m. I think close to 3:30 a.m. would I think be right. Okay, so let me continue. So when the cops say they don't have any suspects, that's actually a misleading statement. It suggests that they've been beaten, defeated, when all they're really doing is playing their cards close to their chests. And I think you can see exactly that in this press release. You're seeing playing cards close to their chest. You're seeing them saying, hey guys, we want you guys to look into this vehicle, but we're not going to tell you very much about it. We're not going to tell you what time it comes on the scene, how long it's on the scene, if it leaves. We're not going to tell you how we got this information. We're not going to tell you who we got the tip from. We're not going to tell you whether it's an eyewitness or whether we've got footage. In fact, do you guys notice that they don't actually even show the original footage of this vehicle? They show stock photos. That's how much law enforcement are keeping their cards close to them, right? So in the same way, when you might say, jeepers, law enforcement don't know what they're doing, it's not that they don't know what they're doing. They are not revealing what they know, because there's a game of cat and mouse that's taking place. I want to be explicit about this. Right now, there's a game of cat and mouse taking place. there's a quadruple murderer out there, right? There literally is a killer on the loose, right? And this is kind of a game. You may resent that word, but it is a game. It's a game of cat and mouse. The mouse is the killer, and the cat is law enforcement. And in a weird way, we are sort of spectators to that game. And law enforcement kind of want to get certain possible information from the public, which is obviously also something that we are spectators to. And bear in mind, um, the killer and law enforcement are seeing the same things. They're seeing what's in the media. They're seeing what the police are saying. They have an idea what the police know and what they don't know. They also, so anyway, the killer will be aware that the police don't have any suspects. Do you think that that's absolutely true? Do you think that it's absolutely true that they don't? They do have leads, they do have certain ideas, but they're not going to be completely clear about it because you don't want to give the killer that advantage. One of the problems with saying to the killer, the list of, do you remember these words? Cotton Star will probably recognize this. The list of suspects narrows. Soon there will be no one out there but you. What do you think that kind of message sends to the killer? It says, Jeepers, they're very close to catching me. I think I need to get out of Dodge. In other words, that can make it harder to catch the mouse. In other words, the cat has got to furtively, stealthily, silently, carefully, cautiously approach his prey. He doesn't want to wave a kind of a banner and do a cheerleading dance and say, "Hey, we're about to catch you." The only way that the cat can catch the mouse is if the mouse isn't completely aware that the cat is there. Does that make sense? So don't be stupid about it. Do you really want law enforcement to say before they can even prosecute, before, well, we know this and this and this about the killer. Okay, the killer's like, well, they know a lot about me. I'm going to get out the country and make it 10 times harder for themselves. Caroline says, if the killer knows he's about to be caught, he can unalive himself. Yeah, that is also a factor, but I don't think they're really worried about that, though. I don't really think that that is a factor. The other thing is, by being too aggressive, you could actually cause this perpetrator to do something to someone else. You could actually get him to reactivate, reinitiate. So you want to calm things down. You want to sort of de-escalate things. Okay. So yeah, this idea that law enforcement are beaten, defeated, dumb, that it's conspiracy, that there's an agenda. It's all it is that they're playing their cards close to their chest. You see it in interrogations all the time. There's often a quid pro quo when you actually have someone in an interrogation room. Law enforcement don't tell the perpetrator or the suspect everything that they know, but the suspect wants to know what they know. And so there's often a trade, a transaction, where the suspect gives a little bit of information and law enforcement give a bit of information. And there's a little bit of a trade, a transaction taking place there. Thanks a lot, Fractured Fairy Tales. Quite a cool avatar you've got there. Does that make sense? So can you see it is a game that's being played? And social media is saying, why can't law enforcement catch this guy and why don't they have a suspect? Don't be naive. That's not how the game is played. That's just not how it works. It is a bit like a poker game. And we are not really invited to that. The public and social media aren't really invited to that. law enforcement have photos inside the crime scene. They've got the evidence. They have a visceral, gritty sense of what they're looking for. They've seen the victims lying in their beds, right? I want to share something very quickly that may sound really dumb, but when I was on holiday, um, I saw in the distance two fishermen, young guys, quite good-looking guys, pick something up, and they were doing something, and I just kind of caught my curiosity, and I sort of went over to them, and what they had with them was this big turtle. It was really about half a meter. It wasn't like the biggest turtle I've ever seen, but it was quite a big turtle, and it was still alive, but it was weak, right, and ineffectual. And they found this turtle kind of in the sand after a big storm, and they took it out to the water and they let it go, and not it didn't take very long, and the turtle kind of washed up on the sea. Um, a wave washed it back out, back up again. And then the fishermen just walked on, and they said, you know what, nature can be cruel, life can be tough. And I thought, geez, maybe isn't there any more we can do? And so I picked the turtle up, and it was really quite heavy. I could actually feel a slight sensitivity under its shell. I could feel it, its shell underneath was slightly soft. And I picked this turtle up, and it was sort of swimming very vaguely through the air. And I carried this turtle much further into the water, and it seemed to do the trick. The turtle was swimming, and its head would come up, and it would try and swim through the water. And I watched it for quite a long time, and I thought, wow, it looks like he's actually going to make it. And then I saw these fishermen later, and they said, you know what, that turtle washed up again. And then I just thought this turtle is going to die in the sun. It can't, it's just going to lie there in the sun and die. And so I went back, fetched the turtle, and carried it to a sort of lagoon area. I just didn't like the idea of it lying in the sun and almost getting sunburned basically to death, and crabs coming and so on. But the point I'm trying to express through this is the turtle was totally foreign. It's the first time I've ever seen such a big turtle. It's the first time I've picked up such a big turtle. It was really heavy, and yet it was a being. It was a creature. It was something that wanted to live, but its ability to stay alive was very reduced. It was alive, and I was thinking, isn't there some way I can save this animal? And one of the things I thought of is, could I drive to some kind of marine area, some kind of marine doctor? What can I do? And in the end, what I did was I carried it to the lagoon area, which is where the water is a lot more calm. And I just thought maybe it just needs to rest, and maybe it can go out with the tide or something. But when I walked away, I sort of thought it is not going to survive, and there's nothing I can really do about it. And I just thought how horrible and cruel and final and terrible death actually is. That you have this beautiful animal that actually has a little bit of life still in it, but it just isn't strong enough to swim out through those waves. And although it's still alive, it just isn't going to survive. And when you apply that sort of flicker of life that is slowly going out, that's the same thing that all four of those students went through. Four beautiful people. Let's see if I can bring up that one. Four beautiful people, and their lives. I mean, what happened to the turtle was really nature. This wasn't nature. This wasn't natural. Four beautiful lives, and you would have had the same thing, where there's a feeling of weakness as they grow weaker and weaker and weaker. And well, they obviously didn't survive what happened to them either. But just the the reality of how fragile life is and that lives can be lost. You go on, you walk away and you go on and you have a meal and you go to sleep and you have breakfast and whatever. But someone else's life comes to a horrible end. I don't know what happened to that turtle. I never actually went back to that beach after that. Um, but I would hate to think what did actually happen to it. Right? And the message in that story, you might say, what's this got to do with it? Is that this isn't just some kind of public spectacle. One life died in a traumatic, horrible way, and another, and another, and another. And it wasn't natural. Somebody eclipsed that life. And the idea you get, the idea I get, is that I can't have my fairy tale in a way because of you. I can't have my fairy tale, so I'm not going to let you have yours. Don't you get that sense? I'm not having my fairy tale, so I'm not going to let you have yours. And so it's actually a symbolic thing. It's not that I'm dying, that I'm literally, my life is, I'm not going to be alive tomorrow. It's a symbolic thing. Status wise, I don't have a life. Status wise, I'm living a social death. Status wise, I'm invisible. Status wise, agency wise, I'm no big deal. Compared to you, like I'm nothing, but you are something. You're going on, you've had your fairy tale and you're going on with your fairy tale, and I'm not. And I'm not going to allow that. Can you see? It's trading a symbolic death with real death. And you've really got to think about the pain that one knife. Have you ever cut your finger with a piece of paper? That's like 0.1% of the pain that actually felt like. That's the other thing to think about is if we're talking about pain, what is the um, if you think about the symbolic pain, right? What was that pain that was so serious to the perpetrator? Because that's the transaction that's taking place. You caused me significant pain in my heart, in my chest. I feel wounded in my soul, right? I feel like you stabbed me in the back or whatever it is. And so I feel justified in doing the same thing to you. I'm feeling not literal pain, not like literal physical pain, but it actually translates to that. Sometimes when you break up with someone or you have heartache, it does actually feel physically painful. I don't know if it is, but the perpetrator is translating a kind of symbolic psychological pain through his criminal psychology into actual physical pain and what we're seeing here, right? Okay. Um, so just to come back to this whole idea, the police do have unofficial suspects. In the Delphi case, we saw the cops had several suspects, persons of interest, but you can imagine if they'd swooped on Keegan Klein prematurely, if they'd said, he's the one, all they would have succeeded in doing is embarrassing themselves. If in a way they seem to do that with uh, Ron Logan, where they sort of said, we think it's this guy. And if you think about it, that probable cause affidavit came out later, and it's kind of embarrassing now. I think. They should be embarrassed about that. Because you were wrong. It looks like you were wrong. In the Morphew case, we saw what appeared to be a very slow investigation. Do you remember that? In the Morphew case, it was like, what is taking so long? Isn't it obvious what happened here? And ultimately, this very slow investigation was scuppered, possibly because it was pursued too quickly. Even in the sense of a prosecution that took longer than a year to get to the point, it actually seemed ultimately that they'd rushed into it. So hard as that is to imagine, we are 3 weeks into this particular case. in the Morphew case, it was beyond the year mark. And once the case went to trial, you kind of got the sense that there were things that took place that felt rushed ultimately, as crazy as that sounds. And so patience is definitely a virtue when you're a prosecutor, when you're law enforcement. As soon as you charge someone, the clock starts ticking against you because you've got to start providing your proof. And we've just seen that in the Delphi case. You name someone, you charge someone, well, now you've got to prove what you know, and then guess what happens? His defense lawyers say, sorry, it's not really enough. You know what? You don't really have a case. And so that's what law enforcement have got to do, is build their case. That's what the prosecution have got to do, build their case. Okay. So what do they know? Well, much of what law enforcement knows has been revealed by Kaylee's father. That's in my opinion. Do you guys agree with that? Much of what law enforcement knows hasn't been revealed by law enforcement, but Kaylee's father. I'm not saying everything Kaylee's father, Steve, said is true or what law enforcement said, but I think he revealed quite a lot, maybe without their permission. And he's definitely frustrated, but I think he is not honoring the protocols that are there for a reason to protect the case. Do you want the killer to be successfully prosecuted? If not, rush them, push them, criticize them, all that kind of thing. I see law enforcement as almost like GPS. You are never, everyone, all of us are navigating the same sort of thing. We're seeing the same pictures. We're seeing, let me see if I can bring up. So that is not a Hyundai. I think that is just a law enforcement vehicle. But what I'm trying to get at is we sort of see the same pictures and we sort of muddle through. But guess what? Law enforcement are holding all the cards. Law enforcement have been inside that house. We haven't. Law enforcement have photographed that house. I think, have they said 4,000 photos? Not quite sure. But thousands of photos. They've looked at the victims. They know exactly what the wounds were like. They've spoken firsthand to lots of people, right? They've had interviews with many, many people already. Law enforcement know a heck of a lot. Just because they don't say anything doesn't mean they don't know anything. But law enforcement, in terms of true crime, are like GPS. So when they name a vehicle like the vehicle that they just named, that is like providing a GPS location for where this whole case is going. And that is of inestimable value. And so we shouldn't be criticizing law enforcement. We should be appreciating them for the information we get from them. They are the true source of what is known about this case, not a YouTuber, not the media, not a victim's parent. Law enforcement, prosecutor, detective, those sort of people. Catherine says, what was said on Twitter about Maddie? Okay. I'm not quite sure what you're referring to there. I'm not really aware. So I think when Kaylee's father, Steve Consalves, asked a reasonable and obvious question when he wonders, for example, whether the hoodie guy had an alibi, I think all along he was someone we actually saw interacting and actually present with the girls close to 2 a.m., very close to when they were killed. It also means he was in the general vicinity. And didn't it look like they sort of brushed him off? I mean, didn't it look like hoodie guy came out of that situation not terribly happy, right? Wasn't that your perception? Hoodie guy came out of that encounter not like smiles, like not all smiles. You kind of got the idea that he went home looking down. He walked home sort of looking down, whatever. Did he get into a vehicle from there? Where did he go? Where does he live? Um, so I think a lot of us have had those thoughts, but um, law enforcement really want to know those answers. What vehicles were certain of these people driving? Okay. So something that I have really meant to touch on is when Kaylee and Maddie had that encounter at the food store. Do you really think she was talking? Do you think Maddie was talking to hoodie guy or that biggish guy with a beard standing right next to him? I don't know if you guys know what I'm talking about. I wish I had it in front of me, but there's that footage of Maddie and Kaylee from that particular angle. Do you think that she was definitely directing whatever she was saying at hoodie guy or to the guy next to hoodie guy? Because to me, it's not clear. It's not completely clear who she's talking to. And the fact is, it's not hoodie guy standing on his own. There's another guy standing right next to him. Gelsey says, I don't believe she's talking to anyone. Well, I think she was talking to someone. The question is, do we know who she was talking to? Do we know who she was addressing it to? Let me see if I can bring it up.
Join Discovery Bank and experience the most valuable rewards.
Sorry about that. I just want to see if I can show you what I'm talking about. I think it's from this video. It's from Inside Edition. Here it is. I'm not sure if this is the one that shows what I want to show. But she is standing next to, sorry, hoodie guy is standing next to this guy. She is standing next to this guy, but in later footage, not quite this footage. There it is. It's not quite that. So he's standing here, and then hoodie guy comes kind of around the corner. So here's a guy giving Maddie, looks like a hug. Do you see that? Have you seen that before? Looks like a guy giving Maddie a hug. Who's that guy? Here you see Kaylee seeming to be entertained by how drunk Maddie is, right? She seems to be quite sober. Kaylee seems to be quite sober. Maddie seems to be a lot more inebriated. There is hoodie guy, and there he's talking to this dude. Now the question is Maddie directing whatever she's saying? Who is she directing it to? Could it even be one of these guys in the background? So let's see if we can bring that up. Oh, it doesn't actually show it, but can you see how Kaylee seems to be the more sober of the two? And there, I mean, there she is recording her. And do the police have this recording? Can they see a vehicle in the background of this particular recording? What do they see in the background of this recording? I just want to go back a second. So there, Maddie gives this guy a hug. There you see Kaylee laughing. She's recording Maddie. There you see hoodie guy and another guy. And then she walks off, and there she is recording her. And do you notice he doesn't even seem to notice? Hoodie guy doesn't even seem to notice them leaving at this particular moment. This guy does seem to notice, or this guy is looking in that direction. If you take all the characters in this video, who really sees them going off? Hoodie guy's not even looking in that direction. And there he does. There he does look in their direction. And he also seems to be looking in that direction. And then that gesture, I think, says a lot. That gesture where now he looks and then he lifts up his hand like that, that seems to suggest something, doesn't it? Doesn't that suggest, hey, what the fuck, right? Doesn't that suggest, but I thought something. Leanne says, has anyone considered that maybe the person who did this is no longer alive? I don't think that's a very helpful consideration, because if you think that, then it's almost like, should we do nothing? It's unlikely as well, I think. Anyway, let's have a look at some of your latest comments. Yeah, the gesture doesn't it seem to be what the if? Yeah, it is like that, right? Let's just watch a little bit further. And then he leaves, then he goes off that way. And I mean, of everyone in this little community, there seems to be the biggest change in this particular individual. No one else leaves at that point. He leaves suddenly after doing that. He seems to be rooted to where he is, and so does everyone else. Anyway, so I'm just coming back to this idea. Do you really, like, because you kind of hear social media and other people criticizing law enforcement and saying, jeepers, they don't have any suspects. They just say we don't have any suspects. Obviously they do. Obviously they do have suspects. Okay, let me just bring that up. Okay, let me continue. So a question I've got is, was Hoodie Guy at the vigil? Does anyone know? Was Hoodie Guy at the vigil? According to the New York Post, according to this article, let's pull that up. Kaylee's father admitted that he fears that a hoodie-wearing man spotted lingering near his daughter and her best friend was ruled out too quickly. Some people came to us and said, he's out of the country. So that is where that, I guess, where that rumor has come from. Some people said that he's out of the country. So who those people, I don't know. Is it true? We don't know for sure. Also, he didn't take a DNA test. I suppose they could still ask his parents to take a DNA test. Are they in the country? I don't know. But if they do find DNA, they can kind of tell from the DNA the nationality, for example, of the person. They can tell if it's a male or a female. They can tell if it is this or that race, amongst other things. So that's kind of a start, I guess. And so he goes on to say, we would like the police to tell us what his alibi was. Okay, so someone says here, Henry Nelson says, hoodie guy took a DNA test. What's your source for that information? What's your source for that information? I mean, basically, Kaylee's father is saying the opposite, seems to be saying the opposite. Okay. In any event, I don't think this case is as far from being solved as many fear. As I said previously, I think the killer, we'll have the killer by Christmas. Who knows? We'll see what happens. So now I want to deal with something else. It is the perpetrator a big dog or a little dog, right? Is the perpetrator a big dog or a little dog? What do you guys think? And I want to, well, I've been on for an hour 42 already. What do you think? Is the killer a big dog? Do you know what I mean when I say that? Is the killer a big person or not? What do you guys think? Is the perpetrator a big dog or a little dog? And I was thinking about this while I was on holiday watching My Little Dog with a much bigger dog and thinking about this case. Stephanie says he's a little guy on campus. Beverly says average. Ray Alvin says big. Kara says little with a big attitude and a chip. Gray Ghost says big dog. Susanna says little dog. Richardson says little as well. Sokoi Cat says medium. Azza says little. Zoe says little bit agile. Okay, so there's quite a lot of differences of opinion here. Holly says little. Nature Lover says little. Kathleen says little. Quite a few of you are saying little. Kelsey says hard to tell. So I think there are two ways you can deal with that question. The one is the psychology. Regardless of if he's a big dog or a little dog, does he think of himself as a little dog? And I think that is unquestionably a factor here. In other words, regardless whether he is physically a big person or not, does he think of himself as little, or does he think of others thinking of himself as little? And I think that's definitely true, right? Yeah, it's quite interesting. Kelly says, I think he used to think he was a big dog. Elena says size doesn't matter. I think it does in this case. I think the reason why there's more than one victim is because it matters significantly. Okay, so just in terms of size, is the perpetrator a big man or small? As I was contemplating this while walking with my dog and a stray, a much bigger dog that was teasing and playing with my dog. Now, the knife, do you guys agree with this? The knife undoubtedly speaks of big dog syndrome. The knife, in a way, suggests that it is a big dog person. It's almost like the knife is saying, I am a big dog, right? But it's likely making up, this is my opinion, for something. The big knife, I think, is making up for something. Probably whether he's a big dog or not, the issue is he feels like he's a small dog. That's the problem here. Even if he was a small dog, if the problem is if he feels like he's a small dog, that's the problem. Where did that come from? The issue is he feels like he's a small dog. Now, I don't want to make too much out of this, but in the food stall footage, do you think that the person that you see there comes out of that feeling like a big dog or feeling like a small dog? Just in terms of that footage, do you think? And what I'm trying to sketch through that isn't to say this is the perpetrator. It's to say, can you see how someone can feel like a small dog in a typical situation, in an ordinary situation, in that setting? Well, it's someone who's drunk or someone who's inebriated, and they ignore you, or they leave you, or they don't say goodbye, or they just um, what's the word? I'm just trying to think of what word do people used to say it? They dumped him, but they ditched him. Didn't you get that sense that they ditched him? He felt ditched. Doesn't that make him feel like a small dog? It's quite interesting. Robbie says he may have a fancy car. So maybe he has a fancy car, but it's like, so what? So maybe he's got a big knife and there's a big gratuitous overkill crime, all because he feels like he's a small dog. The crime itself, do you guys agree, is about making a statement? The crime itself is about making a statement. What's that statement? Isn't the statement, I'm a big dog? Why must that statement be made? Because he's a small dog. The crime itself is about making a statement, I'm scary, be afraid of me. But why does he need to make that statement at all if it's self-evident? Well, isn't it because it's not self-evident? Isn't it because his experience in the social sense is that he feels intimidated? Precisely because he isn't a big dog, or more pertinently, a big enough dog in his own mind. Does that thinking, is that sound in your mind? Does that sound in your mind? But then beyond the psychology, is he a big guy? So we've established that possibly in his mind, he thinks of himself as small, but literally, is he small or is he big? Is he a big guy? So the fact that he had to wait for all the victims to be asleep, and not just asleep as they might be on any other night, but inebriated asleep, I think that means that our killer is a coward who wouldn't otherwise back himself in a one-on-one encounter, even inside a house occupied mostly by small or slight women. So if you think about it, his victims are, three of them are women. All three of the victims are quite slight. And they are killed when they are defenseless. They're in bed, they sleep, and they are to some extent inebriated. It's not really a fair fight, is it? It's not really a big dog taking on other dogs in a fair fight. It's not that. So what is it? Mel Stiller says, I think he's slight but muscular. Well, a lot of young men, 20 years old, that fits that description. So do you guys agree with that? The fact that he's got to wait for them all to be asleep, and or just the fact that he knew that they were asleep, and not just asleep but inebriated, it's not a fair fight. It's not a big dog taking on other dogs in a fair fight. Tamara says small, weak dog. Okay. So this suggests that he's a small dog with a small dog mentality. That's what I think the profile is in this case. Right? He's a small dog with a small dog mentality. Now, I don't know if this vehicle addresses any of that. If the vehicle was given to him by his parents, does that confirm that he can't get a vehicle himself, or his vehicle doesn't really compare to the vehicles of the other dogs, kind of thing? Or his vehicle doesn't really compare to the vehicle of Kaylee, for example, right? Okay. So it could also mean the student is on the young side. So just in terms of the big dog, is it a big dog or a small dog? It could just mean that the student is quite young and he's frustrated that he can't gain any traction without resorting to force. So if you take that entire equation out of the picture and you say, don't think about it as big or small, think about it as someone trying to achieve agency. And it's actually got nothing to do with size, it's got to do with traction and agency. David says, great analysis. I think you're right. Not that this alone would make a murderer, but it's simply noticing that this is part of the mindset. Thanks for that. Where did I post my comment? Seems to have disappeared. Cat K says, I feel he might be small physically. He could have been very large, overweight, except I don't think he could pull off what was pulled off unless he was in good shape. Bear in mind, he's running up and down stairs and he's still at large. So whoever it is fairly swift and stealthy, I would say. Did I paste this? Maria Lopez says, I believe that it was only for one student and the rest were witnesses that had to be killed. I think that could be accurate. I think that could be accurate. I mean, if you think about it, if you go into this house, let me bring this up. If you go into this house and the idea is that you want to kill one person, but they are in bed with another person, that's the first collateral casualty. Then you want to get out the house, but on your way out, you run into somebody else. That's your third casualty. And in the middle of fighting off that person, you fight with someone else. That's your fourth casualty. So that could well be how all of this played out. If you think about it in another way, just in a practical way, if the killer wants to target a certain person, all he really has to do is cover up his identity, attack the person that he really is after, and even if he encounters other people, he can just sort of bump them out the way and run out the house. Theoretically, maybe he would rather wash himself and spend time in the house and clean up or something. But if you think about it, he doesn't have to kill anyone else. So could he have been under the influence himself, that he wasn't thinking so clearly? Okay. It could also mean the perpetrator is a woman. So in terms of, if you take what we're speaking about and you say the perpetrator is small and has a psychological sense that they're small, or couldn't the perpetrator be small, and small in the sense that they're female, and because they're female, the only real option in terms of executing this crime is you're going to have to wait till it's dark, you're going to have to wait till they're all in bed, you're going to have to wait until they're asleep, you're going to have to wait until they are compromised because they're intoxicated. But someone who needs all of that, it could also be a female. I need a lot of advantages because I'm small and weak. Well, who could be like that? Well, it could be a young male, but it could just as well be a female. Cheapest, that's disgusting. Could just as well be a female. Okay. Just in terms of that psychology, is it a big dog or a little dog? Well, a little dog takes you to some extent into the arena where it could actually be a female. I doubt it, though. I don't think the perpetrator is a female, but if we are exploring possibilities and there's a potential same-sex scenario going on, could the scorned person be a young female? I think you've got to consider that. I don't think it's very likely, but I think it's definitely a possibility. So in terms of this tweet from Brian Enton, sorry, this isn't Brian Enton, it's Noah Walter. I'm not sure if this is the tweet I'm looking for. Okay, so anyway, that is that aspect that I wanted to deal with. There's also the number 3 clue we all missed, but I think I'm going to leave that for another live stream. Well, this is kind of almost at 2 hours. I think I'm going to leave it at this point. I want to try and preserve my sleep schedule, and if I go on for much longer, I'm going to be waking up in mid-morning. I'd rather not do that. So I think we're going to cut off the analysis here. The last thing I want to do is just do a quick Google search and see what comes up. So let's just see what they're saying. 1 hour ago, Slane University students' neighbor says front door left wide open. When that came out right in the beginning.
Mike, thanks so much for joining me tonight.
Came out right in the beginning. Let me do it like that. So that's just come out December 8th. Let's do that. The neighbor says the front door was left wide open after the attacks. Shall we play a section of this?
She is live in Moscow, Idaho. You had an interview with the police chief yesterday. What's happening there today?
Hi, John. Yeah, the police chief gave us great new information and says that they're on pretty good track here to hammer out the timeline and exactly where these victims were the night this all went down. But the crime scene is still sealed. The police chief says they're doing everything they can to find the killer. short time ago about some of the whereabouts of the victims that night. Investigators had said just in the past 48 hours, they were still trying to figure out.
So what I want to assure.
Police chief
Okay,
gave us
so
great new
it doesn't
information
seem as
and
though
says
they
that
are
they're
giving any information about, in terms of this interview, about the door being open, but they do say here, nearly 4 weeks later, claimed they saw the front door wide open. That's not really accurate. The reports about the front door being wide open came out like on the first day. It definitely came onto my radar, and then I found it was really quite hard to get that information again. And what that could show is quite a chaotic crime scene, almost like the killer botched his crime. He maybe was targeting one person and it ended up being kind of a bloodbath kind of thing. Why would he exit the front door? Well, one possibility that he might exit the front door is if he'd parked right there. I mean, the way to get to his vehicle might be right by the front door. Not the wisest place to park, but if your victims aren't alive to see that, then who else would be? Thanks a lot, Paddy. Thanks a lot for that. Thanks a lot, Lisa. Wow, okay. So I just want to see if there's anything else about this. Yeah. So I just want to see if there are any other developments. This is from the New York Times. I don't see a date. That's December 7th, so it's fairly old news. Just want to see if there's anything else that's really current that we haven't seen. "22 hours ago, police looking for Hyundai Elantra." I must say this is such a high-profile case. There's constant news coming out. Often it's repeating or delayed or something, but yeah, constantly news coming out. Okay. So yeah, so that is it. I hope you found the analysis that we've done today useful and interesting. I do want to cover the number 3 clue we've all missed. So do you guys remember what the number 1 clue was? The number 2 clue was that if it's not someone who's within that fabric, if it's not a ex-boyfriend, if it's not a housemate, if it's not someone who's within that relational dynamic, then it must be an INCEL type person. That it's looking more and more like it could be that, right? If you are clearing away all of the usual suspects, then that leaves you with an incel type scenario. And in a way, this crime does correspond a little bit to the Isla Vista case. If that is the case, you could actually have a situation of a repeat incident, which is pretty scary. Did I miss? Thanks very much, Caroline. I really appreciate that. Thanks very much. Do you guys remember what the number 1 clue is that we all missed? Cancel culture says cancel culture. Where did Hoodie Guy live in relation to the crime site? Teresa Nelson says, I've missed so much. Thanks, Kelsey. Thanks for that. Magical Mother, pleasure. The Humble Grower says, thanks, Nick. You gave me plenty. Until next time. Sounds good. Who's Blustery Day says it's been reported that it's the #1 trending story across the US. I'm not surprised. The Humble Grower, yeah, who is the odd one out? Who's the odd one out in that story, in the story? Oh, never got a notification. Okay. Okay, so we're going to deal with the #3 clue we all missed in the next analysis. That'll probably be tomorrow. How I came onto this subject matter was I couldn't really believe that they were saying parties continued after this incident. So in other words, after it was November 13, right? After November 13, there were subsequent parties there. And what do you think that tells you about what's going on, what's really going on in that student community? So when I read that article, wow, in that area where there was a quadruple homicide, parties continued. What does that like instantly tell you? That's the #3 clue we all missed. And that's what we're going to be talking about in the next analysis. Okay, so thanks very much, everyone. Again, apologies for the slightly delayed start, but I am one of the few YouTubers that have got to deal with like quite a high level of difficulty just bringing these episodes to you. But thank you for being patient. Thank you for being supportive and bearing with me. And I'll probably be back here around about the same time tomorrow. Thanks again just to all the mods, especially to Stephanie and Terry. Thanks for to the members, some of the new members who signed up. Thanks to all the new subscribers. If you don't know me, I'm a true crime author. I've written dozens of books on many, many cases. I do still want to cover cases that involve lots of bloodshed, knives, or these kinds of weapons, and what that tells us, what that intertextuality, what that GPS tells us about this case. So maybe we'll do that in the #3 clue we all missed as well. I've been wanting to do that for some time. As part of thinking about this idea, we've spoken about what kind of dog are we dealing with? Is it a big dog or a little dog? Also, what does this perpetrator look like? We're going to deal with that in the next analysis. Cat cases, how do we know there's no blood trail outside? From the photos we've looked at, there just doesn't seem to be. You would expect there to be one, and the fact that there isn't one, I think, suggests that the killer must have washed up. That's what I think it suggests. Okay. And then, yeah, I must thank you guys so much for the super chats. Bear in mind, if you're watching this on replay, if you're enjoying the content, you're enjoying my approach, our approach to the true crime community, you're welcome to hit the thanks button. Fractured Fairytale says, I need a walk in nature after this. Do yourself a favor and do that. Terry says, sorry, I've been in and out. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate this thoughtful and brilliant community. Cool. Good to see you. Thanks a lot for that, Stephanie. Van Lechimp, good to see you as well. I know you were here, I think, quite early on when it wasn't even clear whether I'd be able to come on yet. Sometimes the power can go out for 4 hours, right? Thanks a lot, Pauline. Okay, so that is it from my side. I will be looking at the news and coming up with whatever I think is relevant between lives as well. So keep watching this channel. I'm also trying to get to 100,000 subscribers. I originally wanted to get there before the end of this year, and then I just gave up on it because for various reasons, my channel just didn't really get much traction. So then I really just gave up on it. But I think there still is maybe a chance. So if you want to try to help me get where this channel needs to go, please share. You don't have to like, you don't have to leave a comment, but please share onto Reddit or Facebook or WhatsApp or wherever people are talking about true crime, and hopefully some new people, new faces will get to know true crime rocket science. Okay. Mary Seelman says, see you all tomorrow. Susanna says, thanks a lot. Okay. Smoky Blue says, I was here late today, but good chat. It was a good chat. Really glad that I had a bit of extended time with you guys yesterday. It just felt cruel that I had to come and go really, really quickly. I'm really glad that I was able to do this live because I drank a Red Bull just before I did it, and I wouldn't have been able to sleep if I had to drink a Red Bull and then kind of lie down immediately. So, Latitude says, new subscriber here. Enjoy your non-sensational approach. Love to see that sort of commentary. This is for rational, real, authentic analysis. So I'm glad you appreciate that. Okay, thanks, guys. See you guys next time. Take care, and if you've got any questions, any things that I've missed in chat, you're welcome to leave it as a comment. And at some point, I am going to deal with your best questions and some of the interesting questions that need to be dealt with. Again, thanks a lot for the super chats. You guys are awesome. Take care. See you guys next time.